Welcome, everybody. This is Alan with Daily Armour of God. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you're all doing well. This is a Bible study that we're going to be doing called Pride and Punishment. So, it's a Bible study all about pride. This may be a little bit longer video. It's going to be a deep dive, and I'm going to be giving you lots of scripture to show that pride is a sin. So, where do we even start to talk about pride? Well, the very first thing would be to define it, and according to Webster's 1828 dictionary, which is a great source for finding words and the meaning of them, because Webster actually was a Christian and uses Bible verses in his dictionary to reference, so it's a really cool tool to use. So the Webster's 1828. So pride, according to that, is as a noun, inordinate self-esteem, an unreasonable conceit of one's own superiority and talents, beauty, wealth, accomplishments, rank, or elevation in office, which manifests itself in lofty airs, distant reserve, and often in contempt of others. It could also mean insolence, rude treatment of others, insolent exaltation. Generous elation of heart and noble self-esteem spring from a consciousness of worth. So there's all these things that define what pride is. Here's pride as a verb transitive with the reciprocal pronoun: to pride oneself, to indulge pride, to take pride, to value oneself, to gratify self-esteem. They pride themselves in their wealth, dress, or equipage. He prides himself in his achievements. So we see here lots of examples of what pride is, according to Webster's 28 dictionary. I'd say number one, the very first one here, is pretty much the main one here. So remember, unreasonable conceit of one's own superiority and talents, beauty, remember that for later, wealth, accomplishments, rank, or elevation in office. So that is what pride is according to the English Language Dictionary, Webster's 1828. So we know what it is, how it's defined, but let's see how God feels about it and what the Bible says about it. And that would be, the first thing is that God hates it. God abhors it. So Proverbs 6:16 through 19 says, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate." Yes. Did you know that there were verses in the Bible that says that the Lord God hates things? And this is one of them. "Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren." So we see here that God hates. He uses the word hate. God hates these. What does hate mean? I have the definitions at the bottom of the screen here. To dislike greatly, to have a great aversion. And what does abhor mean? Well, abhor is to hate extremely, or with contempt, to loathe, detest, or abominate, which is very interesting that abominate is in the abhors, one of the slots here for abhor. It's very interesting. And then abomination, of course, is extreme hatred, detestation. So yes, God hates. He hates these sins. He thinks it's an abomination. So abomination means extreme hatred, detestation. These definitions are also from the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. So Proverbs 16:5 says, "Everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord, Yahweh. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished." So again, it says abomination. If you are proud in heart, it's an abomination. So doesn't that tell you that God considers it very serious? God considers all these things that we read in Proverbs 6:16 through 19. very serious. He calls them abominations, an abomination to be proud in heart. So these things are very serious to God. And a lot of times, I think we as humans, we don't really consider that pride is all that bad. But it actually is, according to God, according to the Bible. So now that we know how God feels about it, let's look at some examples. But before we do, I just wanted to do a little side note here. The rainbow. The rainbow belongs to God, plain and simple. That really is all there is to it. It's not, the meaning of this rainbow is not what it means today. The meaning of it today has been corrupted. But if we look at Genesis 9:12-17, and God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you." He's talking to Noah here, by the way. "For perpetual generations I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." So we see here in Genesis that the rainbow is God's. It is God's. He said it as a reminder of the covenant that he'll never flood the earth again. Now that doesn't mean there won't be small floods, but he's talking about a devastation, like Armageddon, if you will, type event where the whole entire world is flooded. Now, he is going to be bringing fire, but that's a whole other Bible study. That's a Revelation Bible study. But he won't be bringing water as a punishment. And of course, I put this down here. This is not what God's rainbow is all about. Not this abomination. This is an abomination to God. This meaning, this is the devil's rainbow. The devil likes to corrupt everything that God has. If God has something or does something, the devil imitates in every single way, shape, and form, except for he makes it an abomination. He tries to twist it. He tries to invert it. Every single thing the devil tries to undo and make his. And so that's what today's meaning of the rainbow is. It's lost its meaning. People don't think of it as a good thing anymore. People don't think of God when they see the rainbow flag. But the actual meaning of the rainbow has nothing to do with what today's meaning is. It's God's. It's a sign between God and us. So every time we see it, we can know that that was God's promise that he'll never flood the earth again, no matter how wicked and evil and perverse and disgusting and prideful this world is. But there will be another thing coming. Like I said, that's going to be fire. So just wanted to do this little side note here, because that kind of goes with pride. It's God's rainbow. All right, number one, examples of pride. We have, of course, Satan. And the reason why he's number one is because he's the first one to ever have pride and sin, which, again, sin is what pride is. Pride is sin. Pride and sin should automatically come into your mind as being, pride should automatically come into your mind as being sin. Sin is pride. Pride is sin, because that's what it is. So, Satan, also called Lucifer, he was in heaven. Obviously, you know the origins of Lucifer. And he was so prideful in his duties and in himself that he started to get a big head. And that's what caused his downfall. And we're going to read here some verses on it. So, Isaiah 14:12-14 says, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, This is Satan talking now. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So do you see here a lot of I? I think we can all relate to that at one point or another in our lives, where we think highly of ourselves. And what does this last part of this verse say? Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell. Every time anyone is prideful, they get brought low. The Bible says that many times. We're going to get to those verses too. Like I said, it's going to be a deep dive, lots of verses, and I want to give you what the Bible says. So he was so prideful, saying, I, me. And we read more here in Ezekiel 28:17. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Remember the definition of pride that we just read? Thinking of yourself as beautiful or wealthy or great. Beauty. Lucifer was beautiful. He was good looking, right? So because of that, that was just another part of his pride. And that's what the verse is saying here. So continuing on with the verse, thine heart was lifted up because thy beauty, thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground, I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. So that second part of the verse is very interesting. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. He became corrupted because of him trusting in his beauty and loving his beauty, his own self. So again, being prideful. We are to be very careful when we present ourselves, when we are out and about. Obviously, we should always look our best and always dress modestly and not be showing off a lot of our bodies. That's not what God wants for us, because that in of itself is pride. We also need to, the Bible talks about, women dressing modestly and also without much makeup. There's something about natural beauty that trumps makeup. So that's just my personal opinion there. But the Bible does command us to be modest in our dressing, because that can lead to pride, that can lead to other sins as well, lust and different things like that, envy. So we have to be careful with that. He was beautiful, and it made his wisdom corrupted because he thought he was so good looking, and that was part of his pride, that he wants to be powerful too, he wants to be like God. And then finally we have another example here in 1 Timothy, when Paul is writing to Timothy. He's talking about how deacons should be, how pastors should be. A pastor of one having one wife and having his children in obedience and all these other things. And this is part of it. It says, not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into condemnation of the devil. So what's this talking about here? This is talking about how pastors or deacons in the church should not be novices. They need experience, they need wisdom, because if you put a novice in that position, they could become prideful, just like the devil was. That's what it says. With pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil, thinking of himself more highly than he ought. That's why you need to be experienced when you're filling those roles, and carefully selected, carefully trained, carefully studying the Bible, and things like that, so don't easily fall away, become prideful. And it's very easy for a novice to do so. So let's move on to number 2, which is kind of a two-parter. We have Tower of Babel and Sodom and Gomorrah. So we'll start with Tower of Babel. Now, I'm sure you guys know the story of it, but let's talk a little bit about it. So at that time, during the time of the Tower of Babel, everybody was living in one place essentially, and speaking one language. And they all had so much pride in themselves of their city and what they were building, that they wanted to build a huge tower that reached the heavens so they could be as gods themselves. They wanted to be gods. So their prideful thinking and their accomplishments and their building. Oh, by the way, this is all done under the control of Nimrod. He was the king, and he led the people. But anyway, that's another Bible study too, what Nimrod is and how other false religions and denominations came from Nimrod. Anyway, so they had pride, so much pride in themselves, what they built and what they've accomplished, that they wanted to be God. Here we're going to read about it in Genesis 11, 4 through 9. And they said, the people, "Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So the Bible describes it perfectly. We know what happens here. God went down to see what they were doing, and they were building one tower. They are all in one accord with each other, and they all had such great pride of what they were building, what they were doing. God scattered them, literally. He made them not understand each other. That's where all the languages come from. And so they spread out. They went so many different ways all over the earth, rather than being all in one place. So very straightforward Bible verses here, and very important to understand that it was pride, first and foremost, that made them get scattered. So, moving on to Sodom and Gomorrah, and also, if you might know this story, but it's not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but also the surrounding cities, which are most likely smaller. They don't get mentioned, but it does say the surrounding cities. So Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities get destroyed. And we see here in Genesis 18, 20 through 21, "And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know." Now, he's explaining this to Abraham, or I guess at this point in time, he might be called Abram still, until, it's either Abram or Abraham. His name changes from Abram to Abraham later on, but he's telling this to Abraham. And Abraham, I'm sure if you've read the Bible before, you know that he's pleading with God, saying, what if there's 50 righteous people? Will he destroy the town still? The reason why he's asking God these questions so many times is because of his cousin. I believe he's his cousin Lot. His cousin Lot, if you recall, was living in Sodom, and he didn't want, obviously, his family member to be destroyed too. So he's asking God, well, what if there's 40 righteous people? What if there's 30 righteous people? And each time God's like, yeah, if I find 40, then I won't destroy the city for the righteous people's sake. And then finally he's like, well, what if there's 10? And he's like, well, what if there's 1? Will you destroy the city? And this is interesting because when they go, 2 angels go down into the city and get Lot and his wife and his kids out of the city. So it's interesting that that he let them escape. It was God's mercy. God didn't destroy Lot and his kids with everyone else, because God had mercy for Abraham's sake. I believe he was saved for Abraham's sake. Also, it's not entirely said, but Lot was not one of those people. He wasn't originally from Sodom. He was just living there temporarily as a foreigner, I guess you could say. So he wasn't involved with all the abominations that were going on there. So that could be also part of the reason why God spared him. So moving on to Genesis 19:24 through 25. And the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. You know, what's interesting is if you look up photos of where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be, and you could see just destruction, you can kind of see. It's very interesting. That in of itself is another Bible study, looking up what the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah area. You can see sulfur and different things and what resemble what used to be structures. It's very, very interesting. If you have time, look into that. But he completely obliterated it. Very. And if you also know the story, unfortunately, Lot's wife does look back when they were commanded not to. And she turned into a pillar of salt. Now, the reason for that is not just because she looked back, but because the reason why he said not to look back, it was in the physical sense, but also in a spiritual sense. She looked back because she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to leave the city, and she didn't want to leave her normal routine and be separate from the world, so to speak. And so unfortunately, she was turned to a pillar of salt because she disobeyed. She'd rather be of the world than be separate. And luckily for Lot and his daughters, they did not look back. They listened and they went without looking back. So again, going back to the original reason why they were destroyed, abominations, pride, disgusting, perverseness, pretty much everything we see in today's world. If not, it's definitely worse in today's world. I bet you if the people of Sodom and Gomorrah saw what was going on today, even they would be ashamed. But the fact of the matter was, they had so much pride that they were doing all these disgusting abominations, insomuch that God himself came down to see what was going on in those cities. Now that's a very powerful. Think about that for a second. God came down and destroyed those cities because of their sins and abominations. That tells you how serious God takes those disgusting acts and things that they are doing. Very serious. So, pride and punishment. Every single time you see in the Bible an instance of pride, there's punishment. Moving on to number 3, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So obviously I'm referring to Pharaoh during the time that the children of Israel were made slaves in Egypt. And I'm sure we all know these stories, the 10 plagues of Egypt. Actually, more accurate to say the 10 plagues of God, because they came from God. God's wrath on Egypt, on Pharaoh. So there's a lot to cover here. A lot of verses that talk about each plague. So the first one being, I did put it in order, Exodus 7:20 through 21. First one being blood. And if you know the story already, you know how Pharaoh, I'll just say it now, Pharaoh hardened his heart so many times and had so much pride in himself, and he thought himself to be God, right? He thought himself to be God. And he did not want to let go of the slaves because of pride, because of arrogance, because of his thinking that he is God. And God used this situation here to show his mighty and awesome power. And we see that with the plagues and how he sent Moses and Aaron to do those on his behalf and get the children of Israel out of Egypt. So Exodus 7:20 through 21 says, And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood, and the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. So blood is the first. Next up we have frogs, Exodus 8:5 through 6. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause the frogs to come upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. Next up we have lice. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart, and hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land. Next up we have flies, Exodus 19 through 21. And the magicians said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and hearkened not unto them, as Yahweh the Lord had said. So it's interesting that even the magicians, these sorcerers, these magicians that were doing all these, trying to do all the copy and do all the tricks, they couldn't do all of them. They couldn't copy all of them. They could do a few just by doing their little parlor tricks. But even they were like, Pharaoh, we can't do this. This is definitely the work of a higher power, God. And Pharaoh's like, nah, I'm going to harden my heart. And he didn't listen to them. He didn't hearken to them. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he come forth to the water, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. Obviously, you know that he didn't listen. Exodus 9, 1 through 4. And this is the next plague, which is all cattle dying, cattle and animals. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, tell him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if thou refuse to let them go, and wilt hold them still, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, and upon the sheep. There shall be a very grievous murrain. The Lord shall sever between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, and there shall nothing die of all that is the children of Israel. Again, you can imagine he did not let them go and hardened his heart again because of pride. All these things, all these reasons. You could read all of Exodus. It's very interesting. I actually really like Exodus. There's so many great stories in Exodus and in Genesis too, and the whole Bible is great. But you see time and time again, Pharaoh, because of pride, hardens his heart. Exodus 9, 8 through 9, the next plague, which is boils. Oof. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, Take you handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward heaven in the sight of Pharaoh, and it shall become small dust in the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil, breaking forth with blains upon man, upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. Ooh, this one makes me cringe the most, I think. The boils. Ugh. Just imagine your whole body covered in these disgusting boils that are blistering and oozing and just gross. Exodus 9, 22 through 23 is the next plague, which is hail and fire. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch forth thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon man, upon beast, and upon every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch forth thine hand. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder, and hail, and fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. Exodus 10, 12 through 13, locusts. And the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail hath left. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day, and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. Next up we have darkness. Exodus 10, 22 through 23. And the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. And finally, the one that made Pharaoh tell them to leave, the death of all firstborns, animals and man. And Moses said, Thus saith the Lord, About midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, And all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon his throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all firstborn of the beasts, so animals too. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall it be like it any more. So again, this plague makes Pharaoh finally let them go, and they go. But the story doesn't stop there. I didn't put all the verses for what comes next, but if you read the Bible before, you know it, but I'll just quickly explain it. So he lets them go. They take a bunch of stuff out of Egypt. It says they spoiled the Egyptians. Spoiled meaning they took a bunch of loot and things, and they left. But the story didn't stop there. Pharaoh, once again, after he let them go, changed his mind again because of pride and anger and this and that, and sent an army after them, and that's when they crossed the Red Sea. Moses parted the sea. They went through. The Egyptians started to go through, but once all the children of Israel were out of from crossing, God told Moses to lift up his rod again and let the waters crash down upon the Egyptians as one final punishment. And so he did, and a bunch of the Egyptian army got wiped out because the waves crashed on top of them. So yeah, Pharaoh had so much pride, all these different plagues, and he still had pride time and time again. And then again with him letting them go, and then he chasing after them, more pride. And as you can see, all these instances of pride had punishments. So he had great pride. He thought himself to be God, that he is God and everybody should worship him and there's no others, well, except for the other Egyptian gods. I don't know how that works, if he thinks that he's one of them or that if he thinks he's better than them. Either way, he thought he was a god. Yep. So moving on to number 4, we have the kingdom of Israel and Judah captivity. Now, between our last example and this example is many years. You have a lot of things happening in between. You have them escaping Egypt, wandering the desert for 40 years, finally going into the promised land, and then there's like 400 odd years of judges, the time of judges. Then you have the time of kings, and that's around 400 years, and then this here, the captivity, is during the time of kings, but it's more later on. And you see here that the kingdom of Israel, or there used to be just one kingdom during Solomon's reign, during David's reign, during Saul's reign. It was all one kingdom of Israel. But after Solomon's son was being foolish, they separated and it became 2 kingdoms. So you have the kingdom of Israel, kingdom of Judah, and so they had their own lines of kings, mostly all bad kings. The kingdom of Israel had all bad kings. The kingdom of Judah had a few good kings, but mostly all bad. So that's a little backstory about that. And time again, prophets came and warned the children of Israel, or the children of Judah, and the children of Israel. They warned both, and they did not listen. It's because the Bible even says this. They did worse than the people that were originally in the land. The people who originally were in the land did so great abominations that God allowed the children of Israel, back when he first let them into the land, to wipe out most of them. Not all of them, but they wiped out most of them because of their sin and their abomination that they were doing. But then the Bible actually says that the children of Israel as a whole, they did worse than the original inhabitants in terms of abominations and disgusting idol worship and just sick things that the Bible does show a few of them, and they're just disgusting and disturbing that they do. But time and time again, they're warned, they don't listen, and then this eventually leads to their captivity. Both the kingdom of Israel gets completely taken captive and or killed first, and then finally Judah, with Jerusalem being the very, very last to being destroyed, and the people either being killed or sent as slaves to Babylon. So we see some verses here. Jeremiah 13:9 says, "Thus saith the Lord, after this manner will I mar the pride of Judah and the great pride of Jerusalem." So again, they had pride, but of themselves. They worshipped idols constantly. They didn't worship God at all. And if they did, they weren't worshiping Him correctly. They were eating, things sacrificed. They were doing this and that. I mean, it was just a mess. It was a mess. Hosea 5:5 says, "In the pride of Israel doth testify to his face, therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity. Judah also shall fall with them." And Jeremiah 24:10 says, "And I will send the sword, the famine, and the pestilence among them till they be consumed from off the land that I gave unto them and to their fathers." And we see all these different prophecies in the Old Testament come true. They do. A lot of them get killed by famine because the Babylonians sieged Jerusalem for many months, and so no food, and came in, and the pestilence, so different diseases, killed a bunch of them, and then a bunch of them got killed by the sword when the walls came down, and the Babylonians went in and they just slaughtered whoever they wanted, and they took as slaves whoever they wanted, and they looted the temple, and they ransacked everybody's houses, and they tore down the walls and burnt the walls and burnt houses and just destroyed it. Ruins. So that was God's wrath because they turned not from their iniquities despite so many chances, over 400 years of chances, and God sending many prophets. A lot of the prophets died being killed by their own people because they didn't listen. They didn't want to hear their truth. They wanted to keep doing their sins and living in darkness. So this was a great punishment, and they were in Babylon for 70 years. 70 years as slaves for their punishment. So that whole situation I could talk about for that could be its own Bible study. But moving on, number 5, we have Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the same one that went to Jerusalem and besieged it, and took a lot of people captive. So he had so much pride. We're going to see here, Daniel 3:4-6. "Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship shall they the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So in his pride and thinking himself to be a god, he built a huge golden statue. And he told everybody, worship it or we'll kill you. And if you know the story, 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were captives, mind you, they did not want to worship an idol. To them it was an abomination. They stood up for what was right. Instead of kneeling, they stood up for what's right and said, "No, I'm not worshiping your idol. I'm not worshiping a golden idol. I'm not worshiping a man. We only worship the one true living God." So they stood up for what they believed in, and they were cast into the fire. But if you know the story, Jesus Christ actually came down before his, before he was actually born into the world as a spirit. He came down, angel of the Lord, it says, went into the fire and kept them all safe, that not even their hairs were touched, not even a single hair. It says not even a hair, nor did their clothes smell of smoke. God completely protected these 3 men, completely and utterly. Like, they didn't get hurt whatsoever. They didn't smell of smoke. Their hairs didn't get singed. Nothing. They were completely saved. And if you know the story as well, Nebuchadnezzar looks in there and says, "I see someone in the form of the Son of Man." So this is another hint that it was Jesus Christ in a spiritual form. But Nebuchadnezzar, oddly enough, gave praise, saying, "This truly is the God." So Nebuchadnezzar is kind of like going back and forth. We see him go back and forth between giving praise to God truly and then giving praise to himself. So we see here in Daniel 5:20, but when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, this is Nebuchadnezzar, he was hardened in pride that he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And over here in Daniel 4:30-33, we see what his punishment is for his pride. So, Daniel 4, King spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. So we see his punishment for his pride. This is strictly pride. His punishment is that he's basically become an animal. And he was like that for years, till he gave God the proper glory. That was his punishment, living out in the wild, eating grass, being as a beast. God brought him so low. A great king of many nations and languages and tongues, and had so much wealth, brought down to living with oxen and eating grass because of his pride. God will humble you. If you have any pride in your life, God will humble you. Moving on, next, number 6, we have Goliath. So we didn't know much about Goliath. We know that he was a giant, and that he had some brothers that were also giants. And we know that he had 6 fingers, 6 toes on each hand and on each foot. We know that he was very tall. He had armor that was very heavy. The Bible describes in great detail, and he had a huge spear that was like a weaver's beam. So he was big, and people like to say that giants are a myth. The giants are real, obviously, because the Bible says so. Goliath, and I trust the Bible over anything. So we see in 1 Samuel the story of Goliath. 17:43-46 is one of my examples here. And the Philistine Goliath said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So let me stop there real quick. I'm sure everybody knows this story. David, at this time, he was just a shepherd boy, and he came to visit his brothers in the army with King Saul. And Goliath challenged, he said, send me a warrior. So the Philistines and the children of Israel were at war, and they were camped close to each other, and neither one of them wanted to make a move. So Goliath was like, send me a champion, and whoever wins, for me versus your champion, the other ones will be slaves. Basically, instead of fighting, they wanted to do it that way. So nobody of the children of Israel wanted to step up to the plate because they saw Goliath, that he was so huge and formidable. Nobody. So then finally David comes and hears all the mocking and all the pridefulness of Goliath, mocking God, mocking the children of Israel. And so David's like, I'm not having that. And we're going to see here, let's continue with the reading. So he mocked and cursed David by his gods. And the Philistines said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. So this is a great. I love this story. All of First Samuel is great. I'm learning about Goliath and everything that went down. David had. This is another lesson, another Bible study, but boldness. David had great boldness. Mind you, he was still a kid here. I bet you he was like more so teenager age, but um, he was like, no, I love the Lord my God, and he couldn't stand hearing somebody discredit him, his nation, or his God. And he's like, and he not only that, but he trusted solely in God. He's like, he saw how big he was, especially compared to him. He's not even a soldier. David's not even a soldier. So, but he had utmost confidence in the Lord God, and that's a great example and great picture of how we should too. Whatever we're going through, we should have the strictest and utmost confidence in the Lord, no matter what, in the face of great evil or great persecution. We should be trusting the Lord just as David did. So Goliath and his pride was brought down low. Literally, he was literally brought down low, the stone to the head, and then David ran up, grabbed his sword, and chopped his head off. He did exactly as what he said. He's a man of his word. So that was Goliath's pride and downfall. Number 7, we have Herod, King Herod, going forward in time quite a great deal. So Herod, he was appointed king by the Romans. He wasn't a true king in the sense of, like lineage and whatnot. But he was king, and also he was king over Galilee, not over all Israel, not over all Judah, but over Galilee. Anyway, so Herod had so much pride. He literally had nothing to do with God at this point in time. But so one day, let's read Acts 12 through 21 through 23. And upon a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat upon his throne, and made an oration unto them. And the people gave a shout, saying, It is the voice of a God, and not of man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory, and he was eaten of worms, and gave up the ghost. Ugh. So we see Herod. This is very short and quick, but Herod has so much pride in himself. We read about all these different things about Herod, and how he killed all those babies 2 years old and under during the time of Christ's birth, because he was worried about the prophecy of the true Messiah, the true King. So he had them slaughtered. So he did such wicked and evil things, and we see that. But this was so great that he did not give God the glory. People were saying, oh, he's like a god. And he didn't stop them from saying that. He didn't correct them at all. He was like, yeah, I am. And so he was eaten of worms, and he gave up the ghost, meaning he died. So it's pretty clear cut here. God hates pride. He hates all these people who think of themselves as gods, and he will bring them low. In this case, boom, dead. Eaten of worms, died. Alright, next up, number 8, we have probably the most well-known, how the Pharisees and Sadducees had so much pride in themselves and in their customs, and Christ himself called them out so many times, and they were just so stubborn and stiff-necked. They didn't want to listen. So we see, let's start here at Matthew 23:12. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. So Christ called out the Pharisees and the Sadducees so many times, because if you know the story, if you've read the Bible, they were more concerned with traditions of men and rituals and doing things outwardly rather than truly worshiping God, right? And obviously they wouldn't accept Jesus Christ. If they would have been reading the scriptures, they would have seen all the prophecy, and they would have seen the signs that he's been doing. But I could do a Bible study just on this one alone. But let's move on to Matthew 23:13 through 14. And this is Christ's words here. I didn't make it red, but these are Christ's words. And he's calling them out once again. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering it to go in. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore shall ye receive the greater damnation. We see so many times Jesus Christ calls them out and says that when you pray, you shouldn't pray like the Pharisees, who pray out in the open, in the streets, doing vain repetitions. Do you think God needs us to repeat a prayer over and over and over again to get it to come true? No. God knows what's in our hearts before we do. So we don't need to do vain repetitions, the Bible says. We don't need to do it out in the open either. It's between you and God alone. That's why he says, go into your closet, shut the door, go into your room. And it's between you and the Lord. And also he says that they fast, and they would appear to be fasting. They're not really fasting, but they appear to be fasting. They'll disfigure their faces on purpose to look like they're fasting and appear holy. All this is done because of pride. Everything they were doing was because of pride. They wanted glory from men. It was an outwardly thing. And it says even their inward parts are like a tomb, like a sepulcher, right? The outside appears nice, but inside is full of dead man's bones. The Bible says that. So they're just so full of pride. Luke 18:9-14 says, And he spake this parable unto a certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and despised others. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as eye unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For every one that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. It's a great parable showing how these guys prayed. They'd say, oh, I'm glad I'm not like these sinners, even though they themselves were. They were hypocrites. So many times they're called hypocrites because that's what they were. It would appear righteous and holy outwardly. That's all. It was just an appearance. So lots to talk about there, but let's move on to number 9. We have Saul, aka Paul. If you know the story of Saul, story of Paul, he started off as Saul was his name, and he was very zealous of the law and of the customs and traditions. It says in the Bible he was son of a Pharisee, so he knew all the customs and traditions and scriptures, and he was basically like the rest of the Pharisees at that point in time before he became Paul. And so he persecuted the early Christian church. After Christ died, he hunted them down, broke down doors, imprisoned, tortured probably, and killed probably. It doesn't say necessarily that he killed them, but he did imprison a lot of them because he was zealous for the law, for the temple, rather than for God. He thought he was doing all these things for God, but he wasn't. So it was his pride. And what did God do? God brought Saul low. He brought him down. He abased him. He humbled him. But we'll see here when we read that he actually, and we know from reading the Bible, that he used Paul for a greater purpose. So Paul, a sinner, someone who persecuted the early church, who imprisoned the early church, God actually used him for the better, and he became an entirely different person, name and all. Like, it's just amazing to see his transformation. So let's read here Acts 9:3-9. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus. Pause there for a second. He was going to Damascus because he wanted to go and find more Christians to arrest and imprison. So as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven, and he fell to earth, and he heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And when the men journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. And Saul arose from the earth and went, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man. So he got blinded. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus, and he was 3 days without sight, neither did he eat or drink. So he got pretty brought low. He got pretty abased and punished for his pride, right? He was mainly persecuting the church for his own ego, for his own glory, to be seen by the other Pharisees and Sadducees, job well done, and all this other stuff. So he was brought low. And I could go on and on about how much God used Paul, but despite being brought low, despite his punishment, chastisement, Paul became a new person, a better person, and a person who is not zealous for the temple and traditions and customs anymore, but zealous for Jesus Christ. And so he did a lot of amazing things. He was the apostle to the Gentiles. So amen for that. All right, so we saw some examples. Now let's see some verses that talk directly about pride. So how to avoid pride and humble yourself. So starting from the left here, we see in Proverbs 11:2, when pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. So the second part here, with the lowly is wisdom, what's that mean? It means if you humble yourself, you have wisdom. Because when you have pride, comes shame. What happens when you're brought down from pride? It's very shameful. And depending on the punishment, it could be embarrassing. Proverbs 13:10 says, only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom. So pride brings contention. That's so true, isn't it? Contention with pride. Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Isn't that one so true too? Every time you have pride, you're going to be humbled in some way, shape, or form. So you will fall. Every time you exalt yourself, you will be brought low. Proverbs 26:12 says, seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. So being wise in your own conceit, being wise in your own eyes, that's pride. Thinking of yourself more highly than you ought. That's pride. And it says there's more hope for a fool than of that prideful person. Proverbs 29:23 says, a man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. If you're humble in spirit, honor shall uphold you. And God looks at those who are humble. God looks at the brokenhearted. He's close and near to those who have a broken heart, a broken spirit, and who are humble. All right. What else do we have to avoid pride and humble ourselves? We have 2 Chronicles 32:26 that says, notwithstanding, Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord came not upon them in the days of Hezekiah. Now, real quickly, I'll explain this. So, King Hezekiah, if I remember correctly, he was kind of a mixed bag, being good and bad. And he was warned that if he did not humble himself and turn away from sin, that the destruction would come upon him, the captivity of Babylon and all that would come upon him. But since he humbled himself, he forsook all this stuff, pride of his heart, and all these stuff that they were doing, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, they were spared. So at least during his lifetime. But afterwards, we know that, they fall. Jerusalem falls. But see here, this is a great example of how to avoid pride and what happens if you humble yourself. So in this case, God's wrath did not come upon him during his lifetime when it was going to. It was going to. But because he humbled himself, God changed his mind. Jeremiah 9:23 says, thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. So I put this verse in here because when we glory in ourselves, in our wisdom, in our might, in our riches, that's pride. But if we recall back when we were seeing the definition of pride, it literally says this, your wisdom, your beauty, your glory, your might, your riches, your wealth, all these things. So, let not the wise man glory. Do not glory in yourself, because that is pride, and pride is abomination to the Lord. Ezekiel 16:49 says, Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom, pride. Fullness of bread and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. So this verse correlates with what we read about Sodom and Gomorrah. Their sin was pride. Obviously they were doing other abominations, but pride led to all those other things. Obadiah 1:3 says, The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? You don't ever want to say those words, because God will humble you. But pride in your heart will deceive you. It will deceive you and make you do things and say things that you wouldn't normally do. All right, some more verses here. Mark 7:20-23 says, And he said, That which cometh out of the man, this is Jesus speaking, that which cometh out of a man, that defileth the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lavishness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. So all those things are because of pride, and all those things defile a man. So it's from our heart, what comes out of our lips, what that usually comes from the heart. So we got to be careful what we say. And it's a great way to avoid pride is by being careful with your words and not being quick to anger. Galatians 6:3 says, For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. Pride does, what did we just read? Pride deceives the heart, right? You're deceiving yourself. Just more examples. You should not have pride anywhere in your life. Philippians 2:3 says, Let nothing be done through strife or vain glory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. So, things should not be done through strife, contention, vain glory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. So, looking out for each other, looking out for your neighbor, esteeming others better than yourself. What is that? That's the opposite of pride. When you esteem others more than yourself, that's being humble. Pride is when you're just esteeming yourself more high than others. James 4:6 says, But he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. This is plain as day. God resists the proud. He will. He will resist you, and he will bring you low. Almost always, he will bring you low if you don't humble yourself. And but guess what? If we humble ourselves, grace is given unto us. So, isn't that amazing? Okay, so now that we know the definition of pride, let's look at the definition of humble. Again, this is from Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary. Humble, adjective, low, opposed to high or lofty. Number 2, low, opposed to lofty or great. Mean, not magnificent, as a humble cottage, humble roof in an obscure retreat. Number 3, lowly, modest, meek, submissive, opposed to proud, haughty, arrogant, or assuming. And you know what's very interesting? I told you this at the beginning, but Noah's Webster's 1828 dictionary gives Bible reference. That's why I use it a lot. It's so awesome. In an evangelical sense, having a low opinion of God resists the proud. Having a low opinion of oneself and deep sense of unworthiness in the sight of God. Yeah, that's exactly what we should do. We shouldn't esteem ourselves high. We should have a sense of unworthiness in the sight of God. God resist, and here's another reference. God resisted the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. We just read that, James 4:6. That's in the Webster's 1828 dictionary. I didn't add that. That's literally in there. Isn't that awesome? Bible verses in this dictionary. Many Bible verses are. Humble, verb transitive, to abase, to reduce to a low state, to crush, break, subdue, to mortify, to make humble, lowly in mind. So, to sum it all up, to make yourself low, to basically, the opposite of pride. Don't think highly of yourself, to bring down, to make to condescend. So, that is what humble is, and that's what we should be doing. Is humbling ourselves before God, because we will be brought low. So here is a little bit of a conclusion. Pride is conceit and considered great sin. It's an abomination in God's eyes, plain and simple. It's an abomination. We already read what abomination is, and that's how God feels about it. Pride has consequences and punishments, chastisement, and God can and will humble you if you exalt yourself through pride. He will. It will happen. In some way, shape, or form. If you have any pride in your life right now, God will bring you low somehow. He will humble you if you don't first humble yourself. So you need to take a look at yourself. You need to be in prayer, be in the Word to see what you could work on, what it is that you need to work on. Give it to the Lord. The Bible has so many examples of prideful people being brought low and humbled. I just gave you about 9 of them, 9 different examples, but there's many. Literally read through the Bible and you'll find so many examples. And there are many verses on pride, as you have seen, and we should study and read the Bible every day to understand what pride is, what it can do to you, and how to avoid being prideful. Obviously, the Bible says to study. 2 Timothy 2:15 says study to show yourself approved unto God. We need to study the Bible, read the Bible every day, be in the Word every day, be in prayer every day. We need a closer relationship with God, and the only way to do that is to be in prayer and in the Word, because the Word is God's words. So I just want to end it here with a few more verses. 1 John 2:16 says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." Pride is of the world, for sure. And that's why we need to avoid it. We don't need to be part of the world. The Bible tells us to be separate from the world. Be separate from the world and do not be yoked to the world. Proverbs 8:13 says, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the forward mouth," which means perverse, "the forward mouth do I hate." So, we need to avoid all those things. I really like this picture here. Do not make peace with evil. We see this a lot these days, don't we? We see so-called Christians making allowances, making exceptions, making peace with evil in their lives, and we shouldn't. We're called to be separate from this world, to not be part of this world, to not be in this world, and to not be yoked to this world. So we can't allow any peace with evil. We can't allow any exceptions to sin. We can't make any allowances to sin, because that leads to us backsliding, and eventually will lead to us turning away from God completely. So it's a slippery slope, as they say. Romans 12:3, "For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith." So once again, it's telling us, plain and simple, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Again, being pride. So the last thing I want to mention here, we've learned about what pride is. We've learned about how to avoid it, examples of pride. If you have any pride in your life, I suggest you go into prayer. It's between you and God and nobody else. And go into prayer and just pray about it. Read the Word every day. Maybe do a devotional. Maybe do a reading plan. But either way, it's between you and God. So pray about it and see how you can get rid of pride in your life, whatever it may be. Think carefully, because there could be something you may not think is pride, but it is. So I'm going to leave you with one final verse. The verse says, and this is the gospel, which is 1 Corinthians 51 through 4. And says, moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel, which I preached unto you, which also ye have received, and wherein ye stand, by which also ye are saved, if you keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless you've believed in vain. For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. So this last part here, how that Christ died for us according to the Scriptures, how he was buried and rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, that's the gospel. That's what we must hear, read, and believe in for salvation, believing that Christ paid everything for us. So this is very important to grasp for salvation. And this is what, if we are trusting fully in this and in the blood shed for us, the blood shed by Christ, and with a pure heart are wanting to live for him, turn from our sins, and not be part of the world, and we could be part of God and Christ's body by accepting him, accepting the blood of Christ. That's really all there is to it. It's very simple. People like to make it very complicated, but it's actually simple. Trust fully in the blood of Christ, that he shed his blood for you, for your sins, that he was crucified, that he was buried, and he rose again. He rose again. He's alive. He's not dead. He defeated death. And that's what we must believe in for salvation. So I just want to leave you with that, which is the gospel. And if you're dealing with something in your life, like I said, it's between you and God, but we should avoid pride at all costs, because it is a very grievous sin, and it's abomination. Think about how many people literally died for pride. So it's very serious, and I wanted to make this Bible study to show you the seriousness of it, because I feel like people don't really grasp the seriousness of pride. It is so serious, and referring all the way back to the very beginning, it's an abomination to God. An abomination. So why do you want to have an abomination in your life? God looks at it like it's an abomination. Think of the worst abomination you could think of, and that's probably how God feels about your pride, if you have it. So, gotta think carefully, gotta analyze your life carefully, give it to the Lord, pray, ask him to work on whatever it is in your life where you're prideful. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you in due time. So, just avoid exalting yourself, avoid saying I, me, and that's what's important. Reading the Word, being in the Word. Otherwise, how are you going to know what God wants for us? So anyway, that's going to be it for this Bible study. Sorry it ran a little long, but I thank you for joining me, and hope you have a great evening, morning, noon, wherever you're at. I hope you've learned a little bit about the seriousness of pride, how to avoid it, and the punishments for pride. So, thanks again, and I hope you take care. I'll see you next time with another Bible study. I'll work on the next one. So, thanks again. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.